The most terrifying sound in the world is not the crack of a gunshot. It is not the screech of tires right before a car crash. It is not the roar of a jet engine or the sound of breaking glass. The most terrifying sound in the world is the rhythmic, synthetic, and relentless beep of a heart monitor, especially when you wake up in a stark white room, smelling of iodine and sterile sheets, and slowly realize that the failing heart the machine is tracking is your own. I opened my eyes and saw the harsh, fluorescent lights of the ceiling. I tried to move my arms, but they were heavy, pinned down by intravenous lines and medical tape. There were wires glued to my chest, a plastic tube forcing oxygen into my nose, and a deep, agonizing ache in the center of my ribs like someone had driven a wedge of solid iron through my sternum. I did not know what day it was. I did not know what time it was. The only thing I knew with absolute terrifying certainty was that my massive empire, my millions of dollars, and my ruthless reputation could not save me in that bed. My name is Richard. I am 65 years old. And until that very afternoon, I truly believed I was the richest, smartest, and most invincible man in my city. Listen to me very carefully, because I am going to tell you exactly how I ended up in that bed, broken and fighting for my next breath. I am going to tell you the truth about the invisible bankruptcy that destroys men like you and me. For 40 years, I played the game of money better than anyone else. I was the absolute master of the hustle. I was the first car in the parking lot in the morning when the sky was still pitch black, and I was the last car to leave when the streetlights were flickering on. I worked through national holidays. I worked through weekends. I worked through my wedding anniversary. I worked through my children's school plays, their baseball games, and their piano recitals. I built corporations. I bought real estate. I crushed my competitors. I accumulated millions of dollars in offshore accounts and index funds. I drove an imported German car that made my neighbors turn their heads in quiet envy. Every time I pulled into my driveway, I wore a heavy Swiss watch on my wrist that cost more than what my first employees made in a year. I built a massive, impenetrable fortress of wealth around myself, and I believed with every fiber of my being that this money was the ultimate shield against any pain, any suffering, and any vulnerability in this world. I used to look my wife in the eyes when she complained that I was never home, and I would say the same lie that every ambitious man tells. I would say, I am doing this for us. I am doing this so our family never has to worry. I am building a legacy. But as I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling, I finally admitted the truth. It was a lie. A cowardly, convenient lie that I told myself to justify my absence. I was not building a future for them. I was feeding my own ego. I was addicted to the adrenaline of closing the deal. I was addicted to seeing the numbers go up on my computer screen. I was addicted to the respect and the fear I saw in the eyes of other men when I walked into a boardroom. My family was just an excuse to fuel my obsession. But to sustain that relentless pace, to be the machine that everyone expected me to be, I had to take out a loan. But I did not take this loan from a bank. I did not take it from a venture capitalist. I took a massive high-interest loan from my own body, and I took a loan from my own soul. When I was in my late 30s, I started getting headaches. My blood pressure was constantly high. The doctor looked at my charts, took off his glasses, and told me I needed to slow down, change my diet, and start exercising, or I was going to be in serious trouble. I laughed in his face, paid his exorbitant consulting fee, and immediately found another doctor who would just write me a prescription for blood pressure medication without giving me a lecture. By the time I was 45, I was entirely dependent on chemicals to function. I could not fall asleep without a handful of sedatives because my mind was constantly racing with profit margins and supply chain logistics. And I could not wake up without drinking 4 cups of black coffee just to get my heart beating fast enough to face the day. I was eating heavy, expensive, fatty meals at steakhouses at 10 o'clock at night while entertaining clients, washing it down with scotch, and then swallowing antacids like they were candy just to stop the heartburn from burning a hole in my throat. My body was screaming at me. It was sending up flares. It was waving red flags. My joints ached. My breath was short when I climbed a single flight of stairs, and I had a constant dull pain in my lower back. But I ignored all of it because I was the boss. I was the CEO. I did not have time to be weak. I did not have time to be sick. The market does not wait for anyone, and I was determined not to be left behind. I arrogantly believed that I could outwork human biology. And then the bill came due, and biology always collects its debts. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it vividly. The sky outside my corner office window was a clear, cold blue. I was standing behind my mahogany desk, screaming at a regional manager over the phone because a shipment had been delayed by 2 days, costing us a fraction of a % in quarterly revenue. It was a meaningless argument in the grand scheme of life, but in my distorted reality, it felt like a matter of life and death. And suddenly, a dull, heavy ache blossomed in the center of my chest. It was not a sharp, stabbing pain like they show in the movies. It was not dramatic. It felt exactly like a massive, invisible elephant had calmly stepped onto my chest and rested its entire weight on my sternum. I stopped yelling. The phone slipped from my sweaty fingers and clattered onto the desk. A wave of freezing cold washed over my entire body. My left arm went completely numb, tingling as if it had fallen asleep, but the numbness was spreading up to my jaw. I opened my mouth to call out for my assistant, but the air simply would not enter my lungs. The room started to spin. The edges of my vision went dark. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the expensive imported Persian rug covering the floor of my office. As I lay there, gasping like a fish thrown onto dry land, the very last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was the high-gloss shine of my custom-made Italian leather shoes. I remember thinking how absurd it was that I was going to die wearing a $5,000 suit, choking on my own ambition. When I finally woke up in the intensive care unit, surrounded by the beeping machines, the cardiologist stood over me with a grim expression. He told me I had suffered a massive myocardial infarction, the widowmaker. 3 of my main arteries were almost completely blocked with plaque and stress. He told me that my assistant had found me just in time. If she had walked in 10 minutes later, I would have been in a body bag. I was alive by a margin of mere minutes. After 2 days in the ICU, they stabilized me enough to move me to a semi-intensive recovery room, and it was in that specific room over the next 4 days that I received the single most brutal, devastating financial and human lesson of my entire life. It was a shared room. There was another hospital bed right next to mine, separated only by a thin, pale blue curtain hanging from a track on the ceiling. In the bed next to me was a man named Thomas. He was exactly my age, 65 years old. But Thomas was not a CEO. Thomas was a carpenter. Through the gap in the curtain, I could see his hands resting on his blanket. They were thick, calloused, scarred hands of a man who had sanded wood, knife-driven nails and carried heavy timber his entire life. Thomas did not have a premium platinum-tier corporate health insurance plan. He was in that hospital relying on the public health system, recovering from a double bypass surgery. Both of us had our chests sawed open. Both of us had our hearts stopped and restarted. Both of us were incredibly weak, vulnerable, and completely equal in the eyes of death. The reaper does not care about your stock portfolio, but the stark, horrifying difference between my vast wealth and his supposed poverty became brutally clear the moment the clock struck 2 in the afternoon and the hospital announced the beginning of visiting hours. The moment the heavy wooden doors of our room swung open, the space around Thomas's bed transformed. It was magic. His side of the room simply disappeared beneath a wave of humanity. His wife, a small woman with silver hair and the kindest, warmest smile I have ever seen, was there every single day. The moment the doors opened, she would pull up a plastic chair, take his rough, scarred hand in hers, and just hold it. She didn't have to say anything. Her presence was an anchor. She brought him homemade soup hidden in a thermos because she knew he hated the hospital food. Then came his children, 3 grown adults, all of them working-class people who took shifts taking time off their jobs just to sit by his bed. They joked with him. They told him stories about their week, and then came the grandchildren. Little kids who would sneak past the nurses carrying messy, colorful crayon drawings that they would tape to his medical monitors. They made the old man laugh, even when laughing pulled at his surgical stitches and made him wince in pain. Thomas's side of the room smelled like home. It smelled like warm food, cheap perfume, and genuine affection. He was a man who probably did not have $1,000 of disposable income sitting in a bank account. He probably worried about his electric bill, but looking at the way his family surrounded him, looking at the pure, unadulterated love radiating from that corner of the room, I realized he was the owner of an absolute empire. He was a king holding court in a hospital bed. And then I looked at my side of the room, the bed of the great Richard, the millionaire, the titan of industry. My bed was surrounded by a deafening, suffocating silence. It was a void so deep it felt cold to the touch. My ex-wife, the woman I had divorced 10 years prior because my job was the only mistress I ever truly loved, found out about my heart attack through a mutual friend. She didn't visit. She sent a sterile, brief text message wishing me a speedy recovery. My 2 children, the kids I had shipped off to the most expensive elite boarding schools in the country because I was too busy closing deals to raise them myself, were both living overseas. My daughter sent an email saying she was in the middle of a crucial project launch and couldn't fly back. My son called my assistant to make sure my medical bills were covered, but said he couldn't handle the emotional stress of seeing me in a hospital. And my business partners, the men I had bled with in the corporate trenches, they did not come to hold my hand. They called the head nurse at the station, not to ask how my pain levels were, but to subtly inquire if I was conscious and lucid enough to sign a power of attorney. They were terrified that the company's stock valuation would plummet if the shareholders found out the CEO was incapacitated. They were already planning my replacement while I was still bleeding into a surgical drain. I had the finest medical team that money could possibly buy. I had specialists flying in to consult on my case. But when the hospital lights were turned off at 9 o'clock at night, when the machines beeped in the dark, and the terrifying, paralyzing fear of death crept up from the foot of the bed and sat on my chest, I had absolutely no one to hold my hand. I had no one to tell me it was going to be all right. I turned my face away from the blue curtain. I buried my face in the sterile, scratchy hospital pillow, and I wept. I cried until I choked. I cried because in that moment of absolute clarity, surrounded by my invisible millions, I realized I was the poorest, most destitute man in that entire building. I spent 40 years of my life believing that financial health was the only metric of success that mattered. I believed that if I just got the money right, everything else would magically fall into place. But life, my young friends, is not a spreadsheet. Life is not a linear graph of compounding interest. Life is a stool with 3 legs. The first leg of the stool is financial health. It is important. Do not let anyone tell you money does not matter. It is the roof over your head. It is the food on your table. It is the security of knowing you are not a slave to debt and you do not have to beg anyone for survival. You need this leg. The second leg of the stool is physical health. This is the engine that allows you to drive the vehicle of your life. It is your heart pumping clean blood. It is your lungs expanding with air. It is the strength in your knees to pick up your child and the clarity in your brain to appreciate a sunset. It is the vessel you live in. The third leg of the stool is emotional health. This is your soul. It is the people who will cry at your funeral. It is the friends who will sit with you in silence when you are grieving. It is the peace of mind you feel when you close your eyes at night, knowing you are loved, knowing you have been kind, knowing you mean something to someone beyond what you can buy for them. I spent 4 decades obsessively varnishing, polishing, and reinforcing only the leg of money. I made it thick. I made it strong. But I completely ignored the others. I let the leg of my physical body rot away with stress, cortisol, sleep deprivation, and terrible food. And I let the termites of arrogance, neglect, and absence completely devour the leg of my family and my emotional connections. When the actual weight of life, the reality of mortality, illness, and crisis finally sat on my 3-legged stool, it catastrophically shattered, and I crashed to the cold floor of a hospital room, completely broken on the inside and the outside. You, the young man listening to this right now, I know exactly what you are thinking. I know the fire burning in your chest. You are in the hustle. You are obsessed with making your first million. You are watching videos on how to optimize your time. You are sleeping 4 hours a night to launch your startup. You skipped your mother's birthday dinner last week because you had an urgent meeting. You picked a fight with your partner because she begged you to just put your laptop away for 1 hour and look at her, and you told her she just doesn't understand your grind. You think that success demands this level of sacrifice. You think that your body is a machine that will endure this abuse forever. You think that your family, your parents, and your friends will just wait for you in a state of suspended animation until you finally decide you are rich enough to pay attention to them. I am a ghost from your future, and I am here to warn you, they will not wait. Your body will not wait. Your parents will grow old and pass away while you are looking at a spreadsheet. Your children will grow up and learn to live without you. Your partner will realize they deserve someone who is actually present, and they will leave. Money is an excellent, wonderful servant. It will buy you freedom, but it is a tyrannical, destructive master. If you sacrifice your physical heart and your emotional heart on the altar of your career, I promise you, you will eventually reach the absolute top of the mountain. You will plant your flag, but you will look around and discover there is no oxygen up there. You will discover that a solitary, lonely success tastes exactly like ashes in your mouth. Money can buy the best, most exclusive VIP hospital suite on the planet. It can buy the most brilliant cardiologist educated at Harvard. It can buy experimental drugs, ergonomic beds, and round-the-clock private nurses. But I swear to you by all that is holy, all the wealth in the history of the world cannot buy the profound, terrifying relief of a warm hand holding yours when you are staring into the dark, terrified of tomorrow. Do not be the richest man in the graveyard. Do not be the VIP patient who dies in absolute solitude while the janitor's room is filled with laughter. Stop right now. Take a deep breath. Look at the trajectory of your life. Look at the stool you are building. What are you sacrificing today that no amount of money will ever be able to buy back tomorrow? Go schedule a blood test. Turn off your cell phone, drive to your home, sit at the dinner table with your children, and look them directly in the eyes, not at a glowing screen. Call the woman who has stood by you when you were broke and tell her you appreciate her. Call your father. Invest in all three legs of your life. Balance is not a luxury for the weak. Balance is the only architectural strategy that ensures you will not collapse when the inevitable storms of life hit your house. I survived the ICU to tell you this story. But Thomas, the carpenter who shared my room, he was discharged 3 days before me. He walked out of those double doors surrounded by his noisy, chaotic, beautiful family, leaning on his wife's shoulder. I was discharged on a Tuesday. I had my assistant send a black town car to pick me up. The driver opened the door in silence, and I rode back to a 10,000 square foot mansion that was completely, utterly empty. Do not make my mistake. Build your wealth, yes, but for the love of God, do not forget to build your life. Ensure your stool can hold the weight of your soul.